Presentation will provide you with an overview of the course content that we're going to be covering related to behavior management. Each one of the slides is going to discuss a different chapter, and so I want to move through those. This is not intended to replace reading through the chapter on your own, making your own notes, highlighting pertinent information, emailing me with questions for clarification on some of the information, taking the quizzes, contributing to the discussion boards, but it is intended to be somewhat of a guide to discuss the really pertinent points, the salient issues that we're going to cover within each one of the very small chapters. So let's move on here. The first slide is just going to lay the foundation or the groundwork of behavior management. So some assumptions as we move forward in managing or changing behaviors in students or children. You need to remember that every child is a unique individual. Individualization is the cornerstone of developing a behavior change process. Children are the same and children are different, and it's really important for us to remember that the plan needs to be tailored to the individual needs of the student. The more we get into teaching, the more we kind of immerse ourselves in a particular grade level or age level or developmental period, the more we start seeing similarities more than we see differences. So it's really important to really look at the differences and the similarities and treat each child as a unique individual. No single set of strategies or remedial procedures are effective under all conditions with all children. Again, individualization. So just because you find something that works with one child at one developmental period during one setting doesn't mean that is going to work for everybody else. So again, the key is individualization. It's kind of like the game Jenga, and that's why I put this little clip in here. In a behavior change plan, if you move one piece, you need to realize that there could be a ripple effect. It could affect a lot of different pieces that you may not even know exist. So when you change behavior or you manage behaviors, always anticipate the changes that bring about. Not only the positive changes, but also some of the negative changes, and then some accommodation that happens after that. What's going to happen? What are some of the replacement behaviors that are going to emerge from that? So just to be prepared. Behavior management techniques should never humiliate or harm a child in any way. I hope that goes without saying, but it's really important to always remember that to preserve the integrity and the self-esteem of our children at all costs. Behavior management should always take into account the specific needs of the child. So those are just some basic assumptions when managing or changing behaviors, and we will move on to chapter 1. And I thought maybe that I would interject a little bit of humor in in a topic that tends to be somewhat overwhelming at times and tends to be very, very serious most of the time. So this presentation from chapters 1 through 12 is a presentation through memes. And so we're going to start off with a little bit of humor, and then we're going to go into the important parts of the chapter. So your textbook starts off with chapter 1 talking about how stressful that teaching can be. And as the cute lady here says, she's 39 and she feels great. Sometimes teaching has a way of doing that to us. Specifically, your textbook in chapter 1 talks about how teachers can get frustrated, they can get burned out, and the research points to an overwhelming majority of teacher attrition due to behavior issues. Maybe being unprepared to handle the behavior issues that are coming into the classroom, maybe not having the correct support within administrative support, behavior support. So chapter 1 really focuses on providing these services to students and making it more tolerable in the classroom. On page 6 of your textbook, it talks about the definition of behavior management, so please read through that pretty thoroughly and know really what the textbook, the authors of the textbook, is how they are defining behavior management. Chapter 1 also talks about the ethical perspectives. We touched on those just a little bit in the intro, but go back and read about the rights of children, starting on page 10. and pay special note to the principle of normalization, the principle of fairness, and the principle of respect for the dignity and the worth of the individual. All very, very, very important parts of the foundation of any really good and effective behavior change plan. So read through all of those very, very carefully, and those all will be reflected on your reading quiz as well. Then on page 14, it talks about the public law, the idea, and the IEP that's developed as a result of a need for behavior change. And then also on page 15, it talks about due process and discipline, Section 504, PL 103, 382. That's the Zero Tolerance Act. So definitely read through that. It's timely and it is relevant. And then they have on page 16, PL 107, 110, No Child Left Behind. As you know, No Child Left Behind is now kind of defunct and has been replaced. So although that's important information, it is outdated, but I find the textbook so useful that it's hard for me to give this one up because of No Child Left Behind. Still important to read through, but just know that No Child Left Behind has been replaced by ESSA. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 2, an overview of Chapter 2. Chapter 2 discusses models of human behavior. It's very light reading. It doesn't dig into, this is not a psychology class per se, but I would be remiss in not mentioning the models of human behavior. This textbook is written primarily from the ecological standpoint, meaning that the individual or the organism is shaped and affected by the environment in which it lives or that surrounds it. What's important in Chapter 2 also is to remember that teachers' beliefs about behavior have a distinct impact on the interactions with the student and the achievement of the student and the behavior of the student. So a lot of Chapter 2 focuses on self-reflection of the teacher and knowing that you have a great impact on the behaviors of the students in your classroom. You will read through the constructivist model, the biobehavioral model, the ecological model, the behavioral model, and then an integration of several of the other different models. So make sure that you read through there and that you understand the different models, and then do some self-reflection and see which one you gravitate more towards the most. Chapter 3 is when we actually get into the principles of behavior management. This one is a little bit more technical, a little bit more wordy, so I really want you to read through this. If it takes 2 or 3 times to read through this chapter, I really want you to have an understanding of it, because we're getting into the nuts and bolts of the actual behavior change plan that we're going to put into place. Chapter 3 discusses things like primary reinforcers, secondary reinforcers, the importance of those reinforcers and tangibles. When do we give reinforcements to good or positive or negative behaviors? Talks about the timing of reinforcements and when we can promote positive behaviors or desired behaviors, focused on the timing of the reinforcements. So reinforcements are really, really important in a behavior change plan. It's often one of those things that is left out because teachers or individuals just don't know how to use reinforcers. And so they can be very, very powerful in changing behavior and bringing out desirable behaviors, but it's important that you know how, when, why, and the frequency in which you use these reinforcers. Okay, moving on to Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is kind of the odd duck in this textbook. Although it contains really useful information, especially if you're not familiar with response to intervention. It's a good overview of that, but it really is important in the overall collection of data and getting yourself used to collecting data through observation, tally sheets, direct and indirect measures. So the collection of data, putting that big picture of the student together, academically, behaviorally, socially, whatever it is, developmentally, in order to do that, you have to be good at collecting data and documenting that those observations. So chapter 4 talks about response to intervention. It's really important that you have a good understanding of what response to intervention is. Hopefully, those of you that are in education, you are coming from or you are a part of a good district with a really good response to intervention team. You have good interventionists, someone who is teaching you the right way to collect data, or maybe you're part of that intervention team. I'll have a video posted on an overview of response to intervention. But basically in chapter 4, I want you to see the marriage between scientifically based interventions and promoting and implementing things that are research-based, processes that are research-based, and really, really documenting those, because really with RTI, response to intervention, the focus is on scientifically and research-based methods. Chapter 5, the functional behavioral assessment. So this is when we really get into taking a look at behaviors and how we're going to change those behaviors. We're going to bring out desirable behaviors, and we're going to try to eliminate or decrease the undesirable behaviors. And we do that through what's called a functional behavioral assessment. On chapter 5 of your textbook, it talks about things like the antecedent behavior consequence, the ABC chart, functional behavioral assessment, positive behavioral supports, interviews, and collecting data to conduct an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment. So with a functional behavioral assessment, you take a look at and you really try to identify the functions of behavior. What is a function of the behavior? Well, we all have a reason why we do such things. There's a reason why there is a function of each one of our behaviors. Now, hopefully, the functions of behaviors are positive, but sometimes the behaviors can be negative because the function of that behavior is attention seeking. We get some sort of gratification in some way. And so where it becomes a problem is because those functions promote undesirable behaviors. And so we want to eliminate those and increase desirable behaviors. So chapter 5 talks about the functional behavioral assessment and your role in that as the teacher, the diagnostician, the school psychologist, the counselor, whatever it is. But you will have a role in developing the functional behavioral assessment. On page 80, it talks about, it actually goes through the steps. So read through the chapter all the way up to page 80 very, very thoroughly, and then take a look at the steps. Step 1 is describing the behaviors. Step 2 is collecting information when the behavior occurs and does not occur. Step 3 is collecting data from as many sources as possible, and so that makes our results more reliable when we have multiple means of or multiple sources of data. Step 4, developing hypotheses about the behavior. Step 5, identifying another behavior that can be taught. Step 6, testing the hypothesis or hypotheses and going forward with that. So that pretty much wraps up the steps. You'll notice in Blackboard that in your actual functional behavior assessment, there's a different approach to a functional behavioral assessment. They all share a very common core. That is to identify what happens before the behaviors, to take a look and really analyze the behaviors, and then take a look at what happens after the behaviors. So with that premise, we can fit into any kind of stepped program, but those are the basic steps in developing an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment. Chapter 6. So what do we do after we have all this great data? We've identified the antecedents to the behaviors, we identified the behaviors, and we've taken a look at the consequences, or what that child or that student is getting, or that adult is getting as a reward for those behaviors, whether it's a positive or a negative reward. So what do we do after all of that? Do we just put it in a file cabinet, lock it away, and say, okay, well, now we know? Absolutely not. Now we develop an intervention plan. So we have all the data that we need. We know why the student is doing what they're doing. So now let's really, really formulate a plan using all of that data. So chapter 6 talks about developing a behavior intervention plan. Some of you may know this as a BIP, but a behavior intervention plan is part of an IEP, an individualized education plan or program. So know that if a student comes to you with a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, know that that is likely part of a federally binding document or a legally binding document, and that it's not up to you to say, well, that student doesn't need it, or I don't agree with that. If they come to you with a BIP, that means that legally you have to institute that BIP. You have to make sure that that BIP is followed. If anything ever happens and the child with the BIP or somebody else in the class, their safety is compromised, then you are liable if you did not follow if you didn't follow the steps of that behavior intervention plan. So very, very important. So read through chapter 6, talking about the BIP. And then chapter 7 is really where we start getting into looking at how we can shape behavior. So chapter 7 talks about methods of increasing behaviors. Just like this guy says, every time I put the dishes on, my girlfriend puts on ESPN. And so that is an example of increasing desirable behaviors. Someone does something, they get a positive consequence or a positive reward out of that. So chapter 7 really goes into some pretty good detail on how an individual can shape desirable behavior. Within the chapter, you'll want to really make sure that you understand the 6 most common techniques used for increasing those target behaviors. Positive reinforcement, shaping, contingency contracting, token economies, modeling, and self-management, I believe. So you really need to be aware of those 6 common techniques that you can use, that anybody can use as a diagnostician if you are wanting to promote that. Those are things that we want teachers or whoever's working with students or children to change behavior is aware of. So chapter 7 is full of really great ways to increase behavior. Chapter 8, methods for reducing behavior. And I couldn't have summed it up any better than what this meme says right here. Every time he starts crying, I just give him his teddy. And then the conversation between the 2 kids say, hey, dude, how do you do it? Oh, it's easy, bro. Just start crying and she gives me a teddy every time. So this is probably a really, really good chapter 8, to just reflect on yourself and see if you contribute to undesirable behaviors. See if you reinforce when the baby throws a tantrum in the store. Do we, because he or she cannot get the candy, do we end up buying them the candy because it's just easier that way? Well, we are reinforcing that type of behavior. So chapter 8 is really a good time for you to do some self-reflection on the kind of behavior manager you are, either as a parent or as a teacher, as an administrator, as a special ed, whatever. It's really an eye-opening chapter. Some terms to pay special note to as you read through chapter 8: extinction. The concept of extinction is very, very important for you to know within chapter 8. Also reprimands, explicit reprimands, and how useful reprimands can be, especially if they are specific, firm, immediate, and they are tied to the specific behaviors that we want to reduce or eliminate. Chapter 9, creating a pro-social classroom management, or classroom, pro-social. On this one, on chapter 9 provides some really good resources in order for you to be able to help others out, creating an environment that is a little bit more conducive to our students who have problems managing their own behaviors. Within chapter 9, for the pro-social classrooms, the authors talk about Glasser's quality schools. It's really important for you to read through those and have a good idea of what the foundation of Glasser's quality school are, and then the circle of courage, belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. Those guide all the teacher-student interactions. Know the implications of those, and know they're just interesting to read about the 2 different roles or the 2 different avenues in which students are nurtured in the classroom. So that's chapter 9. Moving on to chapter 10, Chapter 10 talks about environmental and biobehavioral management. So this is where we take what's in the behavior in the FBA, and we provide teachers, clinicians, parents, whoever, with the tools to actually shape the environment and manage in a biobehavioral way, manage the environment. So in chapter 10, the authors provide you with some really good interventions to use, things that work well, and some things that probably we use quite a bit that don't help. Things like timeout can be very, very effective if they're done correctly. So chapter 10 really talks about managing the environment and managing behavior through manipulating the environment. It's also important to remember that it's discussed in chapter 10 about expulsion, and that the student cannot be removed for more than 10 days. Just make sure that that is something that you know from this point forward, because I promise you a lot of administrators don't even remember that. So a student who is on an IEP, who's receiving special education services, cannot be removed from their setting for more than 10 days. That is a due process hearing in the making if a student is removed for more than 10 days from their setting without having an IEP meeting. So very important for you to remember part of the law. Chapter 11, working with families. So working with families is not always as bad as people make it out to be. Matter of fact, parents are a critical part of changing behaviors. Very, very critical to have that working relationship with the parents, to have that support at home, just reinforces what we teach them at school. The concept of generalization is discussed here, and generalization basically means a student acquiring a skill and being able to use it across all different settings. So it's if a student is biting at home and they're not biting at school, well, we need to figure out what we're doing at school that they're not biting, and we need to work with home. Vice versa, if a student is fine at home but they're biting at school, they're biting at Sunday school, they're biting at daycare, wherever, but they're biting across different settings, and we need to figure out what's working at home and implement that at school. So working with parents and families can be critical in making sure that a behavior change plan or a behavior modification plan, whatever, is used. So making sure that you have trust and buy-in from parents and families is really critical when developing a functional behavioral assessment. Chapter 12, issues and current concerns in behavior management. Again, another chapter just kind of wrapping everything up together, using integrated framework, making sure that we just adhere to all of the best practices when developing a functional behavioral assessment. In a nutshell, what I really want you to get from all of these chapters, the overarching broad concept of this class, is to look at behaviors, but also look at what causes behaviors. Look at those antecedents to behaviors. What are the triggers? What leads up to these types of behaviors? What is the behavior? And then what are the consequences of those behaviors? Is the child receiving some sort of immediate gratification from those behaviors? What type of positive or negative reinforcers are we providing for those types of behaviors? So we do this through data collection, observation, interviews. We do all of that. We collect that data, we organize it, we put it in charts and graphs and reports and everything else, and that's what your functional behavioral assessment is. And we compile all this, and we figure out really what is going on with that behavior. We put a plan in place, and then we continue to teach that plan, and we assess our plan, and we see, hopefully we see growth in the child. I talk a lot about the child here. For your project, you can choose anybody who wants to be a part of this, and because everybody has undesirable behaviors, things that we want to see changed maybe in somebody else. Obviously, if you're going to do a spouse or a girlfriend, boyfriend, mother, father, whatever, make sure that you use an alias for any of the documents or the data collection that you're putting together. I'm not interested in names of anybody, so make sure that you make up a name, an alias. But really, I use the example of punctuality. If you have a spouse or another adult that you know who has a problem being somewhere on time, punctuality is an issue. Well, then that's a behavior that we want to change, or we want to attempt to change. We want to first of all acknowledge that that is a problematic behavior, that someone cannot get somewhere on time. They're habitually late. So let's determine the functions of those behaviors. Let's determine the antecedents and the function. What kind of gratification are they getting out of, of running late? Is it poor time management skills? Is it poor executive functions? Is it the fact that they receive some sort of positive instant gratification, some sort of an adrenaline rush from poor time management? So we want to find out what the function of those behaviors are, and then we want to change that behavior. We want to collect data to do that, and we want to put a plan into place to where that person is not rewarded for those types of behaviors, but they are given the tools to try to fix those types of behaviors. So, in a nutshell, that's what this class is about. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Again, this little overview was really more to kind of make you smile and to make you kind of lighten up a little bit about looking at behavior, because this class can get a little bit technical, and it can get a little bit there's a lot of data collection involved in it. But what I want you to remember is this is all positive stuff. So this is not a right or a wrong. This is knowing the processes and perfecting it over a period of time. The more you do it, the more you see the value in it, and the easier it becomes. It really does work, you guys. Functional behavioral assessments really, really do work. You just have to do it the right way, and you've got to practice. So as always, as you read through the chapters, if you have any questions whatsoever, and I do anticipate questions, I want you to email me, and I'm happy to visit with you about providing some sort of clarification on the information. If we need to schedule a phone conference, I'm happy to do that as well. Or just send me an email. But I can't wait to hear and read about the behavior change plans that y'all are putting into place. And I think that's all that I have. So thank you.